Good morning, everyone. And I apologize for a little bit of delay. We had a little technical difficulty there. But this is Mike Beasley. I'm with Cohesive Solutions. And today we'll continue our series on Maximo Nuclear 7.5. With us today, matter of fact, let me do just a quick check as a matter of making sure that you're able to see the screen. Can I just see a show of hands to confirm that you have the ability to see the screen? Should be seeing Maximo Nuclear with the cover slide there. So again, I'm Mike Beasley. We have with us today is the guest is Lance Morris. Lance is one of the co-founders of Cohesive. Lance and Joe Shippert, who is the product manager for IBM's Maximo Nuclear solution. They'll be presenting the program today. You may also be aware, if you were able to join us on September 16th, this is part of a series. At that time, we did an overview of the new features in Maximo Nuclear. Today is going to be on clearances, as noted in the invitation. And then, again, as a reminder, on the 18th of November, we'll cover corrective action, and then close it out on December 16th with configuration management. I say close it out only to also add that, as mentioned on the 16th of September, this is a program or a series of webinars that we're doing for the benefit of our, either our client or prospect base, those interested in Maximo Nuclear. If there are other topics that you have questions about or an interest that we continue this into January with another program, let us know. We're interested to hear from you and get your feedback. So please keep that in mind as we go through this. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Lance and Joe.
Thanks, Mike.
And good morning to everybody.
So this is the famous spider diagram from the nuclear solution that shows you all the different modules and enhanced capabilities that come with the nuclear solution. The one we'll be focusing on today is in the upper right-hand corner, the clearances. It was initially introduced in version 6.3 of the nuclear solution, and when Mike clicks a couple more times, you'll see it was enhanced with version 7.1 and 7.11, as well as when the red one comes up, it was enhanced again further with 7.5. So it's really on its fourth major release. Most of the enhancements and improvements have come via feedback from the development partner group itself. So it's, as it mentioned there, it's robust configuration control, and it has a lot of features and capabilities and flexibility built in. All right, next slide. So to hit on some of the highlights of some of the features, we won't go deep into a lot of the features and functions of clearances. Kind of what I wanted to do today was hit the highlights here and then actually go through a clearance lifecycle and look at the screenshots that you would take to process a clearance. So looking at some of the high-level features, there are multiple clearance types in the system, working admin and template clearances. That is set up as a synonym domain, so you can create your own different clearance types if needed. They just need to relate back to one of the base three so Maximo knows how to process and support them. Similarly, there are multiple tag types. There are danger, caution, grounding, test, and no tag. And again, that is also a synonym domain as well. So you can create as many different tag types as needed to support your program. They just need to relate back to one of these base types for processing rules. Clearances are fully integrated with work orders, preventive maintenance records, and lineups in version 7.5. Fully integrated in that work orders can be associated with clearances. PMs can have clearances predefined so that the clearances generate a working clearance when the PM generates a work order. And it also is fully integrated with lineups to share component position information and take credit where appropriate. It has full tag sharing and conflict checking capabilities. The tag sharing allows you, if you desire, to share tags across multiple clearances, saving manpower and potentially dose from having to send somebody into a high red area to place another tag on a component that's already been tagged for another clearance. Conflict checking capabilities check for conflicts across multiple clearances where different clearances may have components tagged with different types of tags or different positions. Revision lifecycle is fully supported, so we can have any number of revisions created to a clearance, and those revisions can be forced to be reviewed and accepted by the work being performed under those clearances. And then there's flexibility in adding and removing work orders to clearances, as well as blocking work orders from signing on to clearances. Similar to work orders, it supports parent-child hierarchies amongst clearances if needed. And then there are new dedicated kiosk applications to clearances. Version 7.1 added kiosk applications for workers to sign on and off of clearances. Additional kiosk application was added in 7.5 to allow for the applying and removing, as well as the independent verification of the tags from the operations group as well. And then there are numerous standard reports that come out of the box based on standard clearance reports you would expect to see. Okay. Next, we talk about some of the setup options. So we'll go through what you would need to consider when setting up to use clearances initially. There's one major setup screen in the organization's options, and it wouldn't all fit on one screenshot, so it's actually going to flow through 3 slides in the presentation here. The first key thing I'd want to point out is the setup options are defined by site. So each site can have their own independent options for how they use clearances independent of other sites. Going down through some of the options there, you have tag sharing capabilities. You can have tags automatically shared if you desire, or you can leave it a manual process that the SRO does during approval, or you can just have share tags on demand. And there is a select action within the clearance application to allow you to see what tags potentially could be shared, and then decide individually which ones you desire to share. Similarly, with the conflict checking, you can have tag conflict checking rules applied automatically, or you can do it on demand. Transfer tags from clearances to work orders. You can have, typically in the U.S., most tags, all tags are typically transferred ownership to the work accepting them. So you can have the option to have the system automatically transfer all the tags when the craft approves the work order, or you could allow them to manually pick and choose the tags they want to take control of. Tag sequence numbers within the clearance must be unique. That can be forced, or you can allow them to not be unique so that you could have different groupings that the order of the tags is independent. And then allow the requirements for independent verification to be changed on a draft clearance. Next screen is some more clearance setup options where the craft approval of the protection is required. Typically that's a yes for most U.S. operations. Some overseas operations do not have this requirement, so it's been made as a setup option. Work order acceptance of clearance revisions, similar to the craft approval. You now have the ability in 7.5 to allow multiple clearances to be associated to a single work order. In prior versions, it was a one-to-one relationship. Then you have a couple of automation options for having the system automatically change the clearance status from approved to ready when all the tags have been applied, restored, or verified, or you can leave that as a manual step. And then changing the clearance status from released to restored can either be automatic or manual. And then down at the bottom you have options as far as which statuses of a work order allow changes in request for clearance protection to be made. And then there is a position where physical position is not controlled. So we may identify a component within a tag out as need or as being part of that clearance, but it's not indicative to the protection. So we identify it in the clearance, but applying a not control to it allows it to be ignored for conflict checking.
Yeah, Lance, I'd love to just jump in a moment here. That last example you gave, a real good example would be if you had a caution tag placed on a particular component, you must contact control room prior to operating. And let's say you had a test tag on that same component, and you were going to open and close, or you might even restore that red tag. That not controlled position allows Maximo to look at the yellow tag, the caution tag, that position is not controlled, and it can just stay on the component while you're performing other manipulations according to your practices. So that's the functionality behind that. I'd also like to mention that we got some great feedback from the development partners and from customers, including non-nuclear customers, and as well as being motivated by the differences in practices that we saw at the overseas plants, and I'm not sure we have any overseas folks on the call. We also saw some differences at the fossil units. I won't say less, but I would definitely say a different level of control is suitable for some of the fossil utilities. So the fact that you've got this capability to control your max VARs for clearances would allow you, for example, to have clearances running at non-nuclear units that would be set up slightly differently than your nuclear units. But we really got some great feedback, and and have done our best to incorporate it all into clearances. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. So the last section of that setup screen in the organization options is compatible tag types, which allows you to define which tags can concurrently be placed on an individual component. So similar to your work order edit rules, you have checkboxes to define which tags are compatible with each other. Now the next slide shows you the setup required on either the locations or the assets, or both, depending on which types of components you're going to identify for tagging within Maximo. This screen was taken from the Locations Nuke application. It looks exactly the same for the Assets Nuke as well as the Quick Locations and the Quick Assets. So up in the upper portion of the screen, we define which positions apply for this given component, and there is a validation domain list of what are the valid positions. We selected, in this case for a breaker, the open and close position, and then also whether or not independent verification is required for the application and or the restoration. And you can also put in notes associated with applying those tags. So if you had position notes about requirements to access the equipment or get to the equipment, or if you wanted the tag placed in a special place on that component, you could indicate that in the position notes. In the center of the screen, you have restoration conditions for each of those positions. And what that does is allow you to automate the generation of restoration positions when we go to clear a clearance or restore a clearance. And we'll look at some of those capabilities a little further when we get into the clearance screens. But essentially you set up a restoration condition tied to a position for a number of components, and then when you apply that restoration condition, if those components are defined for that, it would automatically set their position. Finally, at the bottom with 7.5 and the integration with lineups, we have an operational history for a given component. So the bottom section would show you the history of that component, all the different positions it's been in, whether it's associated with a lineup or a clearance, and then it's sorted such that the last event date should be at the top to show you what the last known position of that component is in the Maximo system.
A couple of comments on this one, Lance. As you mentioned, just picking up on the operational history, this is foundational to some of our future plans for Maximo Nuclear as well. This capability is in the product right now to refer to clearances and lineups in terms of defining the last known position. We will also be using this operational history concept in the duty stations application, which we're developing right now, so that your operators from the duty stations is essentially logs, and you can take actions like opening or shutting a valve, which would be very compatible with the opening or shutting on a clearance or lineup, but you'll also be able to start and stop equipment, take equipment to an inoperable status, and that'll all be tied into your logs. So there's going to be one place to really grab your equipment history, among other things, just making it possible to directly go to Maximo for some key KPI information, which everybody tracks on various systems. So that's a little bit of a foundational piece. This is also the basis. We're working with some plants right now for integrating clearances with their INC systems. You know, think ahead to the glass control rooms, where you're not going to have your standard big old GE control switch that you can use to hang a cover on. You're going to be really having a CRT display. So this operational history will be integrated through the Maximo integration framework into your nuclear process computer, using all the isolations, of course. But this will be the basis for that type of integration with the glass control room of the coming plants. Possibly this might be useful at Bellefonte among our existing customers like TVA. Also, one other quick comment. This is locations and assets. Quick locations and quick assets were discussed in the last webinar. So we won't go into that in detail, but all the information essentially that you're seeing on this screen is really critical, is the critical information for the quick locations and quick assets, to give primarily the operations folks the ability to have the benefits of validated locations and assets in their clearances, even if a given location or asset has not made it into the plant configuration database. So an example would be a free seal might be an example, or other kind of operations tools. Possibly even an air compressor might be necessary. So, and once again, no conflicts. If you really need to have that information as part of your configuration, quick locations and quick assets would be fully promotable into the configuration management scheme of Maximo Nuclear. And that also is the topic of another webinar. So thanks, Lance.
Thank you, Joe. The next slide, as I mentioned earlier, we were going to hit some of the highlights and setups, and then we're just going to take a clearance through its normal life cycle. So this diagram is intended to depict the normal life cycle of a standard clearance. Obviously, such as with work order tracking or other applications, there's all different perturbations and combinations that you might run into in the field. This doesn't affect or doesn't reflect capabilities of revisions. It's just basically showing you the creation of a request for a clearance through generation, execution, restoration, and completion. So we'll refer back to this diagram several times in the presentation. So for the next few slides, what we're going to concentrate on are the boxes that are highlighted in red. We'll talk about how maintenance indicates the need for a clearance on a work order. We'll talk about the initial steps of creating a clearance and identifying the boundaries and associating it with the work order. Then down in the right-hand section there's identify restoration positions in sequence, and we'll go ahead and do that in this section. I show it in the diagram as a parallel activity. You could do that when you create the clearance, but it's not required that that be done prior to issuing the clearance to the field. It just has to be done sometime prior to approving the restoration. So it's shown in the diagram as a parallel activity. In some cases where you're going to do a clearance and immediately restore it after the work is done, you may go ahead and do it up front. If you're identifying a clearance for an outage that's months away, you may not know what the plant conditions are going to be coming out of that clearance, and you may wait till later to identify that information. All right, next slide. So this screen shows you the upper section of the main work order tab for work order nuke. This is where a standard work order would identify the need for a clearance. And the way they do that is by checking that box that's highlighted in red saying clearance protection is required. And that is checkable or updatable based on the work order status. If you remember back a few slides back, we identified what statuses a work order needed to be in to modify the need for a clearance. So this work order is in a waiting approval status, so we still have the capability to check that box. Once it goes past the approved or in progress status, then that box would go to a read-only status. This slide shows you a screenshot of the task window on the work order. So it also shows you that the capability is there to identify a clearance at the task level if needed. So you have the flexibility to do it at the work order or the task level or both. One recommendation I would make is if you're not planning on doing it at the task level, I would probably either use some of the tools that come with Maximo to either hide that field from the screen or make it read-only so that people don't get confused and request it.
Lance, that's a great point. I might just jump in here and say initially Maximo clearances only supported excuse me, a single clearance to be associated with the work order, multiple work orders to a single clearance, but only a single clearance. In version 7.5, based on our dev partner feedback, we enhanced that to allow multiple clearances to be associated with multiple work orders. So this, of course, gives you ultimate flexibility, but they really are, based on the research we did looking at this functionality, it adds considerable complexity. And what we found is that the single clearance to a multiple set of work orders is a very viable and a very straightforward model. I think some operations folks would consider that best practice. But again, Maximo Nuclear gives you the option of setting the MaxVAR to go one way or the other, and then you can take those steps, like you mentioned, Lance, to hide or not hide based on your business practices.
Thanks, Joe. So the next screen is where we would create the clearance. So this shows you the main clearance tab in the clearances application. Should look fairly familiar look and feel to it. Up in the upper left-hand corner we have clearance number and description, as well as we can identify the location, asset, or equipment group associated to the clearance. That doesn't necessarily need to be the same as the work orders it supports. It's just the main component that we are affecting with this clearance. Again, they are site specific. We can tie them to a unit, plant system. One of the key fields there that's required is the type field to indicate whether it's a working, admin, or template clearance. And then we have our status. If this were a working clearance created from a template, we would see the template identification there as far as where it originally came from. There's also flags to indicate whether a tag share has been looked at and the last date that it was looked at. And then we'll get to it in more detail later. It has the full classification specification functions now. Down in the center of the screen, it shows you the basic information as far as who created it, who's the last person that changed it, any revisions associated with it. Down in the bottom left hand, you have your typical schedule information with target start, schedule start, actual start, as well as finishes for each. The durations, you can tie them to outage codes, schedule codes, milestone codes. Then over in the right-hand section, down at the bottom, we have just counts of the number of tags that have been identified for this clearance. And then it wouldn't fit on the screenshot, but there is another section, and we'll see some screenshots of it later on, basically showing you auditing data at the bottom as far as who approved the clearance for application, who approved it for restoration. So next we're jumping over from the clearance tab to the application tab, which identifies the components, either locations or assets that we are going to affect with this clearance. So in this case, we've only got one tag location identified on the screen. It gets a unique tag ID associated with it, the tag location, the application position. It tracks the tag status through the life cycle of the clearance. So that tag status starts in a draft, but it will automatically change as the clearance goes through its life cycle and the tags get applied, verified, restored, and verified. We have that tag type that we talked about earlier, this one being a danger type. And then we can also associate the tags with boundary equipment groups. Over on the right-hand side, it shows you different information about the tag and where it is in the life cycle, whether it's been shared with another clearance, whether it's been released, whether it's waiting independent verification is required, and whether it's waiting independent verification to be performed. And then down at the bottom, you see the history as far as who applied it, date, comments, and who verified it, date, comments. We can identify as many different tag positions here as we needed to support the safe work environment. Next, I'm showing the select screen on how we would go about to associate work orders to a particular clearance. This would feed into the Related Records tab, which we'll see next. But we could either add work orders individually as related records, or you can do the Select Work Orders button, which is what the dialog I'm showing here. And this shows you all work orders that have checked that clearance required checkbox, and then you can query and filter this list down and select one or multiples to bring back to your clearance. Next. So this shows that Related Records tab. So had we selected both those work orders listed in the previous screen, they would have been brought into the Related Work Orders section of the Related Records. We also have a section in the middle there for child clearances. If we had parent-child hierarchy set up for our clearances, we could see all the child clearances that were underneath this clearance. If this were a template clearance, then we might also have related PMs that are associated for the automatic generation of working clearances when those PMs get triggered, and that shows in that third section. And in the fourth section, we can relate those clearances to different equipment groups, from our functional equipment groups or boundary equipment groups, ever how you define your equipment groups within the application. Next. Then, as I mentioned, we could go ahead and do the restoration at the same time. All the tags that we identified in the application screen automatically carry forward to the restoration screen. And then we can individually either define the restoration position, or by using a select action, we could apply those restoration conditions as far as what condition the plant needs to go back into, and if those positions are defined for that, it would automatically fill in those restoration conditions. The last piece we would need to fill in would just be the restoration sequence number, as far as if there's a particular sequence that the tags need to get restored in.
A quick point here, the apply restoration select action, that will go back to your location record. Lance showed that earlier, how you relate a restoration condition with a position, with a component, location or asset. And it's also important just to reinforce that this also can tie back into lineups. If you've established a lineup, a plant lineup, and have a required position associated with normal standby operations or power operations or certain large integrated tests, you can tie into that lineup information on your clearance too. So really, that's the other side of the integration. You can take credit for clearance restorations on lineups, and lineups can also tell you how to restore the clearance.
Excellent point, Joe. I didn't bring it up earlier, but version 7.1 had the restoration conditions capabilities, but then 7.5, those got integrated with the plant lineups application, so that they can either be manually created, or the lineups can take control of those restoration conditions, which once they take control, then they can't be edited in the locations application. All right, next. The next slide talks about operational impacts of a given clearance. This screen should look very familiar to the screen that you see in the impact plans in the work orders application. We can identify tech spec applicability, tech spec comments, which tech specs apply, and importantly, we can also identify unavailability components for our maintenance rule availability calculations. That capability existed in the operational impacts on the work order impact plans. I wasn't aware of many customers using it. Most went back to the operational logs to figure out the exact date and time that the tags were applied. So now that process has been integrated within the clearances to help automate that information flow as well.
That's also feedback we received from the development partners to tie unavailability into the clearances, so it's been brought in. And I'll also mention that these are some of the features, Lance, you mentioned that tech specs are associated with impact plans, tech specs are associated with clearances. In an upcoming webinar, you'll see they're also associated with corrective actions. And this is what we call the tech spec framework, which will allow us to really bring automation to work on the LCO tracking application we're working on. So when you're going to build an LCO, you'll be able to go and interrogate Maximo, and it can automatically filter for you and bring back, well, these are the clearances, and these are the work orders, and these are the corrective actions associated with this particular tech spec for your LCO.
Thanks, Joe. The clearances also have the standard Maximo log tab capability, so you can create logs associated with a given clearance. It also tracks communication logs, so you have full capability of creating communications or sending emails related to a clearance in conjunction with communication templates. And you can see in version 5 here, we also have the capabilities of the rich text editor and the long descriptions or the details of the log notes. Next. As I mentioned earlier, clearances also in 7.5 now have the full capabilities of classification specifications. So you can create different classifications or classification hierarchies that can be used in conjunction with clearances. Each of those hierarchy levels can have a set of attributes that are associated with them, and those attributes can be cascaded and appended to the different clearances. So as an example here, I just used a standard risk assessment questionnaire classification that would get applied to the clearance, and then we could have our standard risk assessment questions listed below and record the answers to those questions.
Lance, that's a great example right there, risk assessment. Another example, and this again came from the development partners, specifically we heard it from TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power, who has an implementation project using Maximo clearances. To put your clearance checklist, what are the attributes of the clearance that maintenance is looking for? This is one of the never-ending industry issues that's out there. We participate in the EPRI work planning users group. This has come up time and again. How do you get that information from maintenance to operations for getting the right clearance boundary? It's been coming up for probably 30 years, that issue, at least, that I know of. And this is another great place to put your clearance checklist, for example.
And the nice things about these clearance specifications is they can have domains tied to them for validation purposes, for standardability, for reportability. There are data attributes that support reporting, queries, anything you need to use the data for, and they are dynamic in that if we have new questions or new requirements that come up, we can dynamically add them to the classifications and they get used from that point forward without having to take an outage or to add a new attribute like we would normally do in normal configuration. Next. So now we go back to our diagram. The next steps in the process is we've developed our clearance in the protection boundary points. Now that gets reviewed and approved by a tagging official, which changes the status of clearance from draft to waiting approval. And then it would get approved by the on-shift SRO for the application of the tags, which changes the status of the clearance to approved. And the way we do that is on the next slide. So there are select actions, so these would be controlled by security groups and profiles. The tagging official has the options there you see listed to approve a revision, or approve the release, which we'll talk about later. When he accepts that approve application, it brings up the change status dialog with the status of waiting on approval, as I mentioned earlier. Same thing or similar process for the SRO. Once he accepts the approve application, it brings up the change status dialog with the new status being approved. Okay. And then also all that information is audited and tracked within the system. So in a select action, we can view clearance history that shows us all the different status changes, who did it, date and time, as well as any operational impact reviews, date and times those were performed. And in that section at the bottom is that screenshot I mentioned earlier at the bottom section of the main clearances tab that shows you who approved the application and who approved the restoration. So the next steps in the process now, trying to pick it up a little bit, we're running a little low on time, but the next step is the operators go out and position the components and hang the tags and then do the independent verifications if required. Then there is the final step of making the clearance ready for use by changing the status to ready once all the operations tags are hung. Next slide. This is a screenshot from the clearances kiosk application that was added with 7.5 now. So a user can log in using the user ID and password at the top. They can select a group of clearances that are already approved for hanging. Once they pick the particular clearance, it brings up a list of tags associated with that clearance, and you can see down at the bottom from the kiosk they can either apply tags, verify the applied tags, restore tags, or verify the restored tags, all from the same screen. You can either select one or multiple tags, and then using the Apply Default Data button, you can fill in the data from that bottom table window to each of the tags that have been selected, or you could fill them in individually. Next. So now going back to our life cycle, we're changing hats now. We're putting on our maintenance hat. So now we'll go through the steps of craft approval of the clearance, the electronic sign-on and sign-off, which I didn't mention earlier, but that would be an optional step. It's not required, but the capability is there for electronic sign-on and sign-off if needed. And then releasing the work, releasing the clearance once the work is completed. So the next step is the craft approval from the work order. So based on that MaxVar, once the craft approval is performed, based on that setting we had, all the tags associated with the clearance are accepted by the work order and transferred to the work order. So we fill in our craft approval information at the bottom, and then it would copy all those tags to the work order. In the diagram also, we didn't highlight it in the red box, but there is a concurrent step that once that craft approval is performed, the clearance status is automatically changed from ready to active. So once all the tags were hung, the SRO made it ready for use, and as soon as somebody started using it, then the clearance status automatically gets updated to active. Okay. Now this shows the electronic sign-on and sign-off from the work order screen itself. So from the clearance tab within the work order, down at the bottom we can hit a new row and fill in, it defaults our information in there, and we can check the sign-on, or if we've been signed on previously, we can sign off and indicate the work is complete. Next. So this is similar look and feel, but it's done, this one is from the Kiosk application rather than from the work order. So again, you can fill in your username and password at the top. It shows anything that you may have already signed on for, or you can select a work order to sign on if you've not been previously signed on. In this example, we are signing off and also indicating that the work is now complete. So the next step is the supervisor would release the work from the clearance, work order from the clearance, through that select action in the work order. There's a checkbox that comes up in a dialog there. They would check that, saying the work order is released from clearance. You can also see the supervisor also has options to add or modify sign-on, sign-off if he's granted that security right, as well as undo the work order release from the clearance. So assuming it has not already been released and they released it by mistake, they can come back and undo that and basically sign back on without having to do another craft approval.
There's an awful lot of flexibility to let you correct minor little errors like this, while at the same time keeping Maximo fully up to speed on who signed on, who signed off, and being able to manage tag sharing and ultimately personnel and plant protection.
Thanks, Joe. So the next steps in the process now that the work has been released, all work has been completed, we've identified the restoration positions, the clearance is in an active status. So the next two steps now is the tagging official would approve the clearance for release after verifying that the restoration conditions are still applicable for plant conditions. And then the unshipped SRO would approve that clearance to be restored by the operators. So the next screen looks very similar to when we approved the application. Basically on the same menu tree, the tagging official approves a release, which brings up the change status dialog for approve for release. And then the SRO does a similar process under his menu tree to approve the restoration, and it changes the status to restore. Then the final step of the process, the operators remove the tags, restore the components to the indicated positions, perform any independent verifications that are required. Then the system looks at any tag sharing. If there are tags shared from this clearance that could not be restored, then the clearance basically goes into a holding pattern waiting on those clearances that have shared the tags to be cleared. And then once everything is cleared, the system automatically changes clearance status to complete. And then the final step would be to close it in the life cycle. So next step, tag removal and restoration. This is showing you the tag restoration from the clearances application. Previously in the application, we showed you the screenshot from the Kiosk application. In the clearances application, there is a select action menu tree that allows you to select each of those 4 individual tabs that we saw earlier for the application, verification, restoration, and verification. So this was select action, tag data, restore tags to show you just a different look and feel for identifying the restoration. Next. And I got the wrong title on this one. I apologize for that. But anyway, this is supposed to be the clearances tab of the main clearances, just to identify that once we restore all the tags, the system automatically changes the status of the clearance to complete.
Lance, that's actually a great title for the slide. Just to point out that another enhancement to clearances is that you can generate a corrective action directly from the clearance. So that's a feature in most of the nuclear apps. We know that corrective actions are what the conscience of a nuclear power station. It's how we keep operating when things aren't exactly perfect. So just like you can from the work order, where you can create a follow-on work order, if you have a clearance issue that needs further evaluation by your staff, just select that generate corrective action, and it'll pull automatically key information right half your corrective action report just with a single click. So yeah, it's a good integration feature, again, with the Maximo nuclear applications.
Great. Thanks, Joe. On the next slide, we'll actually see that. What we did here was just take a screenshot of all the different select actions that are available within the clearances application. We've looked at a couple of them so far, but the clearance status at the top is what we would use to make the clearance ready if we were doing that as a manual process, or to cancel the clearance or to close the clearance. We looked at the approvals in the process we've reviewed. The tag data allows you to view data associated with the tags, as well as indicate your application or restoration of the tags. We can create clearance revisions. As Joe mentioned, as far as correcting minor errors, there is a shift supervisor undo select action that basically backs this process up a step if needed, depending on if all the requirements are met. You can manually run tag sharing capabilities to bring up a list of potential tags that could be shared that you might want to take credit for. And then you can also do the manual conflict checking. In the create, as Joe mentioned earlier, there is a create option for creating a corrective action from a clearance. And then there's options to create working or admin clearances from a template clearance. The generate restoration is the option I referred to earlier, where we could select a restoration condition and have the restoration positions for all the defined components automatically set. And then we talked about the ability to block and unblock work orders from signing on to a clearance, as well as the flexibility of adding and removing different work orders through the work order option. There's information to view, child clearances, tag-related information, as well as the view history that we saw the screenshot earlier. We're looking at status change histories. I didn't point it out when we looked at the operational impacts tab, but that information is controlled via select action. So there wasn't most of the fields you saw on that screen were read-only except for the text spec comments. All other changes have to be made via the select action for add, modify operational impacts, and all those changes are audited as we saw on the history screen. And then all the other features or select actions below there are standard select actions you would see in most applications in Maximo for the duplicate, delete, attachments, information, bookmarks, and run reports. Last couple of things I wanted to go over was the automation setup with the preventive maintenance module. So we saw in the related records tab where we could relate PMs to a template clearance. The other side of that is on the PM application on the job plan sequence tab down the job plan sequence window. We have the ability to associate a template clearance ID with our clearance or with our PM, and have it automatically generated a working clearance when the PM generates a work order. And we have additional options associated with that on the next slide. So in our select action in the PM, we have clearance generation options. You can see in the dialog that comes up from that select action, we can elect to not have any working clearances generated for the PM, meaning we identify the template that we don't want working. We want someone to manually handle that process. Or we could define that we want a separate clearance for each PM work order that this creates. So each PM work order would have its own individual working clearance. Or we can have the ability to match criteria to share clearances across similar PM work orders. And you can see down below there's a lot of options given for how you want to match and determine similarity between different PM work orders. So some of the standard options are the equipment group, schedule code, milestone code, outage code, and then you can set date windows of how closely their due dates need to fall. And the window that's minimized there is that additional match criteria. So if you didn't use any of the standard codes that you might want to match on, you can actually write your own SQL statement on how to determine similarity between PM records. And then the button at the bottom allows you to test that SQL code to make sure it's a valid SQL statement. So tremendous flexibility as far as automating the entire process for standard repetitive activities. I think I've just slipped down under 10 o'clock. So next slide. I'll turn it back over to Mike now to moderate any questions we might have.
Okay. Thank you, Lance and Joe. Nice job in covering that. And I'm going to open it up to questions here in just a moment. If you do have a question, I'd ask that you raise your hand. We already have one that's in the queue that I'll go ahead and ask on behalf of Steve Childers for Lance and Joe. It says, the question is, can you show a tag replacement and or tag removal list? So we'll start off with that question. And again, if you do have questions, just raise your hand and I'll open the mic for you to ask here after Lance or Joe answers his first question.
Yeah, I certainly have some on my laptop, Mike. If you can somehow, if we can figure out how to show it, or let me show my desktop. But the point I would make is that we do have smart reports that look at status of the clearance, the status of the clearance, status of the tag, and you can pull this smart report at any time and use that either to hang tags and restore tags, or following hanging and restoring tags. It will give you the actual information.
Hey Joe, if you'd like to, if you've got the screenshot, I can give you the view, and you can share that if you'd like. If you've got it available.
Yes. Why don't you
just tell me when?
Yeah, go ahead and give it to me now. I really can't tell if I'm sharing or what, Mike.
I'm going to send it over to you.
Okay,
There
I
you go.
presume I am now presenting. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the clearance configuration change order. If you can see my file name, it's before. So
Hey,
this
Joe,
would be,
can you expand that?
sure. Does that look a little bit clearer?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so you can see here, this is the configuration change order prior to tags being hung. If you look, we've got 3 tags, 10, 17, 18, 19. The action is to apply them, and they're to be applied in the racked out, closed, and closed positions respectively. So I could take this report in my hand and I could initial off on it right out in the plant. And just to make the point I've already made, so this is before the tags are made. So this next one hopefully will be the same clearance after. And this shows us that Wilson hung these tags back on December 17, 2007, and what time he actually hung them. Okay, so does that answer the question?
Steve, I just opened your line.
Yeah.
If that satisfies you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm seeing what I want to say. Question sequence number. Where is the? I'm not seeing a sequence number on there. Though you said you had this week ago hanging in the field, but I'm not seeing a sequence on this.
Yeah, I can't answer that. I don't know why the sequence. It should be showing. Yep, sequence should be showing.
I don't want to monopolize time, but I do have one other quick question. Is there any allowance for temporary lifts within your clearance model?
Yeah, temporary lifts would be handled by a revision. A temporary lift needs that same level of approval, right? You need to have someone indicate that, yep, it's okay to do it, and then release it out into the plant. So we would use a clearance revision for that, Steve. When we looked at that function, when we looked at that functionality, we thought about creating temporary lift capabilities or not, but it's essentially just what you would have with a clearance revision.
And the only other thing I've got right now on grounds, those are just tags, right? They're just generated as a tagging point.
Yes.
And so in order to add grounds to an existing clearance or to remove grounds from an existing clearance, you basically have to do a clearance revision each time, correct?
Yes, it would be the same thing, right? You would have a separate ground would be a line item on the clearance.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you can actually list that as a position on the component, right?
Sure, and you could do that as well. That would be the alternative. There is a variation on grounding practice in the industry. I know when we looked at the EPRI standard on tagouts in nuclear power stations, it recognized that there was some people use red tags and and show the position, and some people use what I've always heard them called green tags for grounding, and the EPRI recognizes both approaches.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Steve, does that satisfy that particular topic for you?
Yes, for now. Thank you.
Okay. I'll just put you back on mute. If there are any other questions, we'll pause for just a second, and I'll have you raise your hand, and we'll open the line for you. Currently, I don't see any other hands raised or questions out there, so that means Lance just did a stellar job, as he always does. But here's one more question. Good. Steve, you got the floor again.
Yes, I had another question. I've been doing a lot of research, but I think you briefly touched on this earlier. I think you allow the ability to have multiple positions for a component.
Yes.
So my question is, in your conflict checking, is there like in one clearance, could you have a valve like open and another clearance have it throttled? And is there a way within your functionality, which I believe, if I understood everything right, that that there's a possibility that you could do that, and somebody could okay that variance of position?
No, we could not do that one.
Did I misunderstand? Okay.
Well, you would have.
No, we
I
would
just want
not.
to make sure about that.
Yeah, we would not permit that. That would be considered a conflict.
But you would have
Okay, I just want to make sure.
The
soft and hard conflicts, right? So you could potentially have a soft conflict that they would have conflicting positions, but based on the scheduled dates, they won't be applied at the same time. But when you go to actually apply them, then it becomes a hard conflict, and Maximo says you can't have the same component in multiple positions at the same time. Is that a true statement?
I just wanted to
That's
make sure about that. Okay, I just want to make sure about
yeah,
that.
and just to reemphasize, if those are all discrete positions, and Maximo sees closed and locked closed and throttled closed as 3 different positions. The only way that you can take a given position out of the mix, so to speak, if I want to say, hey, this position, let's call it position blue. If I don't want it to conflict and to run into Maximo conflict checking jail, and that whole, then I designate that one position, and typically it would be an uncontrolled position, and the typical use case would be the yellow tag that you want to remain on a component while you're manipulating it, or while you're doing a temporary lift on it via a revision. And we do have, and Lance opened up another whole subject. I wish we had another hour to get into this, but we do have hard and soft conflict checking, and again, this is another issue in the industry where sometimes you're going to you might have a situation where you want to approve something in advance because you are controlling the timing, and you can accept that soft conflict. But the hard conflict, you will never ever put do something which would create a hard conflict or a physical impossibility out in the power plant. It's a complex subject. We should really talk about that for a good half hour or hour.
That could be another webinar even.
There could well be another. There are so many features, additional features and clearances, that we could go over, but we didn't want to get bogged down in some of the details.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Steve, does that satisfy that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, everybody. We're past the top of the hour. Again, my apologies for us being delayed with the start. That has put us a little behind. That was on our end, just a slight technical challenge that we encountered at the beginning. But nonetheless, I want to thank you for joining with us today. We hope you found it helpful. If you would like a copy of this recording, not only the PowerPoints, but all the audio, I'd ask you that you just send an email request to lhunter, that's L like is in Liz, LHUNTER at cohesivesolutions.com, and Liz will be glad to forward that to you. So with that, we'll close out the webinar, and again, thank you and have a great weekend.